Sure. Well, vultures as a group are the most threatened group of birds in the world, and that includes all birds. So if you look at the 23 species of vultures around the world, over 70% of them have a unfavourable conservation status, which means they're at risk of going extinct. And in terms of the African context, the biggest thing that's killing vultures is poison. So the whole of the African continent actually is being poisoned at the moment, from the smallest invertebrates all the way up to the largest elephants. Poison's killing the whole continent. And so that's also killing lots of vultures. And in South Asia, where we also work in Pakistan, poisons of a different sort have caused the decline of vultures there, and in that case it's veterinary drugs that have been responsible. We have a number of key activities. So my primary role is ecological research, so understanding the vultures and the ecosystems where they live, so the interspecific relationships, what they eat. We know vultures eat dead meat, but we don't know how often they eat it, where they eat it, how they find it, how they interact with other species, what type of habitats where they like to nest, what the environments are, where they nest and how that's affecting their nests. So there's a whole lot of ecological research that we do to understand more about vultures. And overlaying that is this risk that they face through an unsafe food supply which has been poisoned. Now, we've talked about elephants, and elephant poaching and the ivory war is the biggest problem at the moment for vultures, because elephant poachers have started poisoning the carcasses of the elephants that they kill deliberately to kill vultures. Because if you're an elephant poacher and you've killed an elephant and you want to get the ivory out of the elephant's head, it takes quite a long time to do that. And the last thing you want as a poacher are pesky vultures circling in the sky above you to give the game away. And the game rangers and the game scouts, they see the vultures, they realise there's a carcass, and then they can go and find it. So the poachers kill the vultures deliberately because they're the eyes. And in terms of physical action, our biggest activity is promoting and supporting poison response kits. So there's two things that need to happen. One is that the field staff who encounter these problems, these poisoned elephant carcasses, they need to be able to secure the site and stop additional animals from being poisoned. But they also need to be trained how to deal with these scenarios. So we support our partners in offering the training to field staff in Africa, and then we also support them by providing the kits, the poison response kits that they use when they find a poisoned elephant carcass. In Africa, the problem's very serious and the vulture populations are declining quickly, and that followed declines in South Asia. In the late 80s and early 90s, there were tens of millions of vultures in South Asia, and almost all of those birds, 99.9% of them, disappeared because they were poisoned by a veterinary drug called diclofenac. That was the main reason those vulture populations declined. And now in Africa, we're seeing another continental level vulture crisis, with massive numbers of birds dying all across Africa and multiple species disappearing very, very quickly. Well, Africa, like South Asia, will look very, very different because vultures have a fundamental role ecologically. They're a keystone ecological species, which means that they have an important and vital ecological function. So of those tens of millions of vultures that disappeared in South Asia, each one of those birds needs to eat about half a kilo of meat per day. And so that means there's tens of millions of kilos of meat lying around uneaten, and the same thing's happening in Africa now. So when you take vultures out of an ecosystem, it has dramatic consequences because they're a keystone species and they consume so much dead meat. They eat more dead meat than everything put together except for flies, blowflies. Vultures are the big game of Africa's bird life. So a lot of people go to Africa to see big game, and they go there to see big birds, and vultures are part of those big birds. But also because of their key ecological role, if you imagine the Serengeti, which a lot of people do, the beautiful savannas rolling off into the distance, those savannas covered with dead wildebeest that haven't been eaten by anything, that suddenly becomes an unpleasant picture. And those vultures that eat so many of the dead animals that die in those ecosystems, if they disappear, the animals will remain uneaten. And it's happening, we're seeing it already. So that very famous crossing of the Mara River that the wildebeest do, and the crocodiles are all there eating lots of wildebeest as they're crossing the river. The Mara River, over the last few migrations, has been chock full of dead wildebeest. The crocodiles can't eat all the animals because the vultures aren't there to help eat the dead animals. From the poisoning problem, the whole of Africa is being poisoned at the moment, from the smallest invertebrates all the way up to the largest animals, which are the elephants, of course. And if you come across a poisoning scene in Africa, the poisons are so toxic that everything dies. From the smallest insects, the flies are dead lying around the carcasses. There's a dead lion in the bushes over there, there's 2 dead hyenas over there, there's a tawny eagle hanging from the tree, there's 50 dead vultures lying around. It's like a wildlife bomb has gone off. There's just dead animals everywhere. These poisons are so toxic, everything that comes into contact with them is killed. So the consequences aren't just for vultures, the consequences are for the ecosystem as a whole, and each time one of these poisoning instances occur, the impacts are dramatic on a vast range of species. At the moment, if we're very realistic about the scenario, we're in full firefighting mode. We're trying to reduce the damage as much as we can until the problem can be brought under control. And what we're doing now, is with our partners in Africa in particular, is offering support to field staff through the provision of poison response kits and training about how to deal with these scenarios to minimise the damage. The poison response kits that we provide, they don't stop poisoning from happening, but they do stop additional animals from being killed. And at the moment, that's where we're at. We're trying to limit the damage as much as we can until the problem can be grasped and can be addressed. And it's an illegal problem. Whenever animals are being poisoned, whenever elephants are being poached, whenever rhinos are being killed, these things are all illegal activities. So it's very difficult to try and address them through legal frameworks that we have now. So drastic actions required. Poison response kits and the training of field staff to go with the kits was an initiative that we developed with our partners in Africa, the Birds of Prey program of the Endangered Wildlife Trust. At the moment, we're the main organisation that's providing poison response kits, and they're not, from a British perspective, super expensive. They're about £300, but in Africa, £300 goes a long way. And so an organisation like us that can provide these kits to field staff in Africa makes a big difference. And then we work continuously with our partners to offer the training. Obviously, we're here, and we have partners on the ground in Africa that deliver the training, and then we provide the poison response kits to go with that. And then you've got an area that's covered as best as it can be, and each time there's a new event, a new poisoning incident, then they can respond, and then the damage can be minimised like we were talking about. So a poison response kit is a kit that contains the materials required to make a site safe. That's its number one role. So if a field ranger comes across a poisoned carcass and they need to stop additional animals being poisoned, the poison response kit contains materials to lock down the site, make it secure, so that the vultures that are still coming in aren't going to get poisoned. And if you've got a 3-ton elephant, you can't just dig a hole and get rid of it. Okay, you have to use all sorts of techniques, and the kit provides the materials to do that. But what it also has is a whole lot of sampling procedures. So every time there's a poisoning scene, it becomes a bit like CSI. So you've got to try and collect evidence, try and find out what sort of poison it was, how many animals have been killed, what type of animal was there in the first place. All of this evidence that often needs to be collected to try and lead towards a prosecution. So if the people who did the poisoning are caught, they can be prosecuted successfully. What a poison response kit does is it stops additional vultures being killed. So the vultures that have visited and fed at a poisoned site almost always die because the poisons are just so toxic, and there's horrible names for them, like two-step. They take one bite, 2 steps, and they're dead. So the toxins that they use are so potent. But what the poison response kit and the response teams do is they stop additional birds that would keep coming in. Now, we did some research on that. So we looked at the effect on vulture populations where poison response kits are deployed, and then areas where poison response kits are not deployed. So if you have a poisoned elephant and nothing happens and vultures keep coming in, you might have 300 vultures that are killed. But if that same carcass takes place in an area where people have been trained to use poison response kits, you might only have about 100 vultures killed. Now, it's still a lot of vultures that have been killed, but in terms of the population over time, it's less bad. I know that's a double negative, but it's less bad than if you say have 300 vultures being killed. This is solid research recently done by the Conservancy Trust and our partners in South Africa, which has showed quite clearly that in the absence of poison response kits, these vulture populations are going to disappear, and quick. And when you start using poison response kits, and if field teams are trained to use them appropriately, the vulture populations remain for much longer.